The collapse of Midnight Society is a harsh lesson, because this wasn't just another indie small studio shutting down, this was Midnight Society, the premier AAA studio that was built with some of the most talented developers in the industry to create the next generation of live service games with the world's first vertical extraction shooter that was gonna run on the blockchain. And I know that sounds like a lot of big words and too many promises to keep, but you know, to their defense, they did have Dr. Disrespect at the helm. He was co-owner of Midnight Society. And before the controversy that shattered his reputation, Dr. Disrespect was actually on track to becoming a gaming celebrity way beyond just like the streaming side of it. But after the details about his permanent Twitch ban became public, well, it didn't just tank his reputation, but it also spelled the doom for Midnight Society as well. And for a lot of people, Midnight Society and the game that they were working on, Deadrop, were some of the most exciting times in the gaming industry because for a moment there, it felt like the future of AAA games was gonna be bright, because while every other studio out there felt like they were just keeping secrets and withholding the players from a lot of the behind-the-scenes decision-makings that happened, well, Midnight Society was basically inviting you to the backstage and listening very carefully to the players' feedback to try to make the best game possible. The vision that the studio had for developing a game from the ground up, with transparency during the whole process, open development and communication with the community, was something that, you know, up to that point, nobody had ever seen out of a AAA studio. But despite all those efforts, despite all the snapshots that they invited the players to, despite all the hype, Midnight Society has shut down, and it's a pretty rude reality check. According to Rich Cabrera on social media, Midnight Society couldn't secure the additional funding it needed to finish development. They were about 85% done with the game before launch, trying everything that they could to raise the remaining funds, but ultimately, they just ran out of time and money. 85% complete from releasing an entire game that could have made you millions and millions of dollars. That is so close. Like, I feel like anybody with Mr. Beast type of money could just buy out the whole studio and help them finish the project. Honestly, it's just really a shame that all of that work will probably never hit the market. But in case you've been out of the loop, Midnight Society was the AAA game studio that was founded by Dr. Disrespect about 3 years ago, and they were working on making the world's first vertical extraction shooter that had elements of it tied to the blockchain. Some of the NFTs that you own could be seen as cosmetics that your characters could wear in the game, and you know, originally they did get a bit of pushback from the community because this was during mass crypto hysteria. You know, before everybody started hating on AI like everybody's doing now, cryptocurrency and NFTs back in the day was like the big no-no in the gaming industry. Now, don't get me wrong, people still hate NFTs, they hate cryptocurrency, they don't want that in their video games, you know, that's just a thing. But nowadays, it feels like they're a lot more lenient with NFT-based games, depending on how they're implemented. Some of them, obviously, are cash grabs, you can see them from a mile away, and we should make fun of them accordingly, you know? But with games like Off the Grid popping off, which also have an NFT loot system implemented into it, well, you can see that as long as the implementation is seamless, unnoticeable, and most importantly, optional, well, people are mostly fine with it. But Midnight Society's failure isn't just attributed to the fact that they ran out of money, you know? Of course, that's a surface level problem, we can see that from all the way over here, but when you dig a little deeper into the events that led up to that moment, you can see that the issues that Midnight Society had to deal with were actually much worse than that. Because how does a studio of that size, with so many talented people behind it, so many streamers backing you up, and all that hype that the community had surrounding the game, how do you fail so catastrophically? And honestly, do you guys want the short answer? Dr. Disrespect. I know that Dr. Disrespect is a super controversial figure in the gaming space right now. I don't think anybody here is trying to deny that, but you have to admit that he was the face of Midnight Society. You know, that was his project, and his brand was the only reason why Midnight Society even got that amount of clout and recognition in the first place. So when all the details about the Dr. Disrespect Twitch ban started coming to light, I knew back then that Midnight Society was in huge trouble. Because a game studio without a finished game to make money off of obviously relies heavily on either investors or community funding, both of which probably didn't want to associate with the project anymore after the whole Dr. Disrespect controversy came to light. But also when Midnight Society decided to kick the doc out of being the face of the studio, I also remember saying at that point that Deadrop was not just in huge trouble, Deadrop was dead. Because the entire fan base that the game had was because of Dr. Disrespect. He was the one who was able to facilitate the deals and get the studio more funding if they needed it, because of how much people supported him and loved him back in the day. So to see that the studio forced him out, obviously that just alienated the fan base. I'm not saying that Midnight Society was in the wrong for kicking him out, I'll let you guys be the judge of that, but they were put in a very tough position by what happened with Dr. Disrespect, and they just had to make a very serious business-related call so that it wouldn't impact the rest of their studio and the rest of their employees. And this is just the harsh reality of not just how risky game development is as a whole, but how tying your company's entire success to an influencer can also be a massive gamble. Because when the whole studio of 50+ employees relies on one person's reputation as a a point of failure, any little bit of controversy can send the whole thing crashing down. And unfortunately, the worst thing that could have happened to Midnight Society actually ended up happening, because the last thing you want as a company is to find out that the face of your studio, Dr. Disrespect, is admitting on social media to inappropriately messaging a minor. But apart from all the controversy surrounding Doc and the studio, there were also a lot of fundamental issues with Deadrop itself that I think might have contributed to its downfall. Like, for example, one of the main selling points about Deadrop, that was also a huge point of controversy, was the NFT aspect of it. So the way that the whole NFT system was working early on is that it was a cosmetic-based system, right? They gave people who got early access a Founders Pass NFT that you could validate on the blockchain to get access to early playtests. And, you know, I remember when I got my email about getting accepted, and I got so excited. I even printed out my own little NFT and everything to put on a picture on the wall. And, you know, back in the day, I wasn't that big into crypto, but it just felt nice to be included. The problem that happened afterwards is that even though Midnight Society tried reassuring people that NFTs were not a big deal inside of Deadrop, well, unfortunately, the damage was already done. Dr. Disrespect mentioned a few times that involving real money into some of the matches was just part of the hype of the game. Like, I remember one time he mentioned, like, hey, what if there was a bounty worth $100,000 and you're trying to extract with it? That would be the coolest thing to see. And I'm sure that in a lot of people's minds when they heard about that, all they could think about was the rug pulls, the hacking, the money laundering, all of those nasty things that could happen inside of Deadrop. Like, all these NFT companies always try to make this whole play-to-earn concept into a viable thing. But in my opinion, earning money to play a game just immediately kills any incentive to play the game how it's supposed to be. Because you're always going to get people who are trying to turn it into this whole passive income stream and try to cheat the system just to make money off of it. And if it was just the cosmetics that were NFTs in the game and there was no way to lose them while you were in the match, then I think people would have been cool with it, you know, since it's just a secondary market that exists outside of the game. But the moment that it was brought up that you were going to be risking your NFTs inside of the match, that's when people probably just changed their whole minds about it. Now, going over the prices on OpenSea for the Midnight Society Founders Pass accesses, you can see that they're crashing hard. They are crashing ridiculously hard, you know. The best offer in the collection right now is 0.0015 ETH, and I remember that back in the day, I had 3 of these little bad boys, you know. I just got a little crazy because I wanted to collect the ones that had like the whole numbers on them. I thought they looked pretty cool, but after I lost interest in them and I sold them, I sold them for about like 0.70 ETH each, so that is over a 90% crash, I think. Math is hard. The point is that these things are basically just worthless now. I also think that the concept of Deadrop itself was kind of overhyped at first, you know? The idea of a vertical extraction shooter was being marketed as this groundbreaking, never-before-seen innovation, when in reality, it was just playing an extraction shooter inside of tall buildings. That was it. You know, when Deadrop was first revealed and people got their hands on it, they got to play the firing range, they got the first snapshot, a lot of people were actually feeling disappointed with how unfinished it felt. You know, the environments were just basic polygons and the movement was feeling pretty clunky and overall just rough to play. And I think people were really just not expecting how literal Midnight Society was being when they said that you would be there during all the early stages of development that other studios usually don't give you access to. And instead of that being a positive point for transparency, what really ended up happening is that it just left a bad first impression on a lot of the players who didn't have the Founders Access Pass and just didn't keep up with seeing how the game was evolving over time. And you gotta remember that when it comes to live service games, first impressions are everything. So people who saw how bad the first couple of snapshots were, most likely just saw it and just immediately wrote the game off. And sure, Deadrop did get better and better over time. You know, the later snapshots were way polished as they were implementing huge changes that looked nothing like the first snapshot. But when you hear the words NFT game and you see these early stages of development look like this, honestly, it's pretty hard to convince people to give it a second chance. But as someone who played a few of the snapshots and I saw how every time they just kept making major improvements to the game, honestly, I feel kind of bad because at the end of the day, Deadrop was actually looking very promising. I was actually very excited to go and play it, even if I don't like extraction shooters because I'm not very good at them. Like, it's just crazy to think how this was a huge project when it was first announced. How everybody was talking about it, how we were thinking that this was going to change the industry dramatically, only for Midnight Society to crash and burn right before the finish line. They say the only way the game can be saved at this point is through acquisition, if another huge company steps in and buys them out, and if they manage to get it for a sweet deal, then who knows, you know, maybe we'll see Deadrop itself get a full release, or we'll see some of those assets be turned into something else. But if it got so bad to the point where they actually had to shut down the whole studio, you know, my gut feeling tells me that they were already looking to be acquired for a while now and they just couldn't find anybody. And I'm more than sure that if Dr. Disrespect had a clean reputation, he never got himself into any sort of trouble inside of the Twitch whispers, things would have been drastically different and Deadrop would have made it to the finish line under Midnight Society. Because Deadrop had the hype, it had the talent, it had the community behind it, it had everything going for it, but in the end, it was just a harsh lesson of how fast fast the industry can change, and how fragile your studio is when you have an influencer be the face of the business.